For those of you who are online from Canada, good morning. And thank you for joining us today online. And I see some of you on Zoom, and thank you for doing that, both from Desert Stream and also iConnect Church. Thank you for being with us today. This evening, or this morning for some, would you like to turn your Bibles to Matthew chapter 26? And I'd like to read a few verses from there. Matthew chapter 26 and verses 5 onwards. Well, actually, verses 6 onwards. Matthew chapter 26. Meanwhile, Jesus was in Bethany at the home of Simon, a man who had previously been, who have had previously leprosy. While he was eating, a woman came in with a beautiful alabaster jar of expensive perfume and poured it over his head. The disciples were indignant when they saw this. What a waste, they said. It could have been sold for a high price and the money given to the poor. But Jesus, aware of this, replied, "Why criticize this woman for doing such a good thing to me? You will always have the poor among you, and you will not always have me. She has poured this perfume on me to prepare my body for burial. I tell you truth, wherever the good news is preached throughout the world, this woman's deed will be remembered and discussed." As we join the journey of Jesus on the last week of his life here on earth, we've been following him around, trying to see the things that took place during those days, starting with the Palm Sunday. And we're looking at some of those incidents that can shine a light on the divinity of Jesus. Because I think Jesus used all the things that he has done or taught during the Passion Week to reveal his divine nature to the people who are there and to all of us. So each day we're looking at one aspect that we can see, the divine nature of Jesus that we can see in those incidents. Today we come to this place in Bethany. Every day he was going to Jerusalem. Today is the only day Jesus decides to stay back in Bethany. Traditionally, this Wednesday in the Passion Week is called Silent Wednesday, because Jesus did nothing except for partying at Simon's house. Well, went for a dinner at Simon's house. And something took place at Simon's house. And this is such a wonderful passage that we have just read, and it's probably preached thousands of times, both in our church, and you probably heard about this particular incident. Whenever we talk about giving, whenever we talk about worship, we always talk about this woman with the alabaster oil. But this is not the only meeting that is happening. Few verses prior to this, you would see another meeting is taking place in Jerusalem. Right? So the two gatherings are have gathered on the same day, on that Wednesday. One is the gathering of religious leaders, the Pharisees, who gathered together and thought, this guy is becoming too famous. We got to do something about him. We got to kill him. So they started sitting and planning how to kill him. Right? They want to. The only problem is they're afraid of people. So the discussion was happening there. Most of the gospel writers did not talk to us, well, all the three gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, did not tell us what was actually being plotted there. Except for John, who gives us a little more glimpse into that meeting, that gathering there that was taking place at Jerusalem, where Caiaphas stands up and says, it is justified to kill this man. It's better for one man to die than for a whole nation to perish. That was the argument that he put forward. Unknowingly, he prophesied about what Jesus was going to do here on earth. Even though his intention was to actually kill Jesus, he was actually foretelling what's going to happen and how that One man's death can lead to everybody's salvation. He doesn't know that. He was prophesying. I couldn't help but smile at the sense of humor of God, that God would use a plotter to prophesy. Right? So that meeting is happening there. While that is happening, there's another meeting happening here at Simon's house. This is the second gathering on that day. Jesus is sitting with his friends, apostles, and John would give us the detail about this woman who had come with the alabaster oil. She broke the jar and poured that perfume over Jesus in an attitude of gratitude and worship. While all this is taking place, there's also another incident that took place right after this, that you would see that Jesus reprimanded Judas. Even though we don't see that in this passage in Matthew, you would see that in John. When you read John and see this particular incident in the Gospel of John, you would see the guy who actually said, "Why are you wasting this much expensive perfume? We could have sold this and given it to to the poor." It was Judas who actually said that. And John says Judas did not say that because he was intending to do that. Judas was a thief, and he gives that explanation to us. So those are the three things that took place. And because Jesus reprimanded, Judas would then leave immediately and go to the second gathering that was happening in Jerusalem, and then tells them, "I'm going to betray Jesus. How much would you give me if I betray Jesus?" Now, until Judas entered into that gathering, they actually decided, let's not kill Jesus during the Passover. So technically, Jesus was not supposed to be crucified during the next few days, because they were actually saying, listen, too many people are following Jesus. This is not a good time to kill Jesus. Let the Passover pass, and then we will plan something to kill Jesus. And then enters Judas into the meeting and says, "Hey, I can get you Jesus." And they thought, wow, what an opportunity for us. And so that's what took place on this Wednesday. And I think it is Eastern Orthodox Church that named this particular Wednesday as Spy Wednesday. Not Spice, Spy Wednesday. Because so much is happening behind the scenes. Well, we're all very familiar with this. We're all very familiar with what took place especially at Simon's house. My focus is not exactly that. My focus is on the last words that we have read in Matthew, where Jesus is saying, verses 9, "I tell you truth, wherever the good news is preached throughout the world, this woman's deed will be remembered and discussed." When she came inside and brought the alabaster jar and started pouring the perfume, everybody is seeing something. I want you to remember that. Everybody is seeing something. Simon, Luke gives us an insight into this for us. Simon is thinking, if only Jesus knows what kind of person this is. Judas is looking at the cost of the perfume and is thinking, I wish I can pocket some money. The apostles or the others who were around the table are looking at this and thinking, what a waste of perfume. Everybody is seeing something except the woman herself. Simon is looking at her, but he's looking at her character or what she's doing. Apostles are looking at the cost and the wasteness of the perfume, while Judas is thinking, I wish I could get some of that money, some of that into my pocket. Only Jesus is seeing her. Only Jesus is seeing her heart. Only Jesus is seeing her brokenness. Only Jesus is seeing her gratitude and her devotion. No wonder Jesus says, as long as wherever the gospel is preached, this woman would be discussed. She would be the one who would be remembered. None of the people in the table, but the woman who broke the alabaster jar of perfume. as I'm thinking about this verse, I began to realize how stark the difference is, the way we look at people and the way God looks at people. People, when we look at others, we always make assumptions based on our perceptions of their external behavior. Right? We see how people behave, how they dress, what they talk, what kind of vocabulary they use, how they stand, how they move. We see all those external factors and then make an assumption based on the perception that we have made out of that. Our observations. We watch that and we think if that person is behaving like that, if that person is dressed like that, talks like that, based on all of that, we assume this is the kind of person that is. That's why most of the time we either befriend people based on our assumption or reject people. But God doesn't do that, right? God does completely opposite. God looks at the internal and then responds accordingly. God looks at what's happening inside your heart, what's happening in the thought level, and then responds according to that. If you ever wondered about the execution of God's justice here on earth, this is the answer for it. When a crime is committed, we expect God to punish in a certain way. Right? We have certain standards. And if God punished one person for that one particular crime in one way, we assume that if another person commits the same kind of crime, God should punish him exactly like that. And the only problem is, in the scripture you would see God deals with people totally different. Case point. King Saul. God told him, you would see that in 1 Samuel chapter 15, God tells him, listen, Saul, I want you to go to Amalekites, attack them, destroy them completely, for they have been, the enemies of Israelites. Don't leave anything, just destroy everything that is there. Saul goes, does not do his job, comes back, does not do his job completely, comes back, in fact, looting them, bringing that loot back. Samuel is somewhere else. God wakes Samuel up from sleep and says, listen, I've rejected Saul. Why? Because Saul disobeyed. I want you to go to him and tell him that I've rejected him as a king. I've got another person who's going to become the king. Samuel goes to Saul and says, what have you done? And Saul gives an explanation for what he has done. He says, actually, I didn't bring it. That's the first thing he says. I didn't bring all of this sheep and all the things, the loot. I was not the guy. The people brought it. Samuel says, no, you're lying. So Saul knew his card. So he then says, actually, I brought it so that I can offer sacrifices to God. If we are the ones who are talking to him, if we don't have the Spirit of God, we'd probably be convinced by the explanations that that person is giving. And then you would see that even though Saul begged Samuel not to remove him as a king, Samuel says, no, but God rejected you, he's refused you. And you feel like that's harsh. Years later, the king who replaced him, David, in the season of going to wars, does not go to war, but actually sleeps with one of his own bodyguard's wife. While his bodyguard has gone out to the war, and he is in the war field and fighting for David, David sleeps with Uriah's wife. Compare the crimes of Saul and David's crime. All Saul did is looting the Amalekites' properties. It's a normal practice in wars. Although God forbids Saul to do that, It's normally that's the practice. Everybody practices the same thing. They go out, they conquer another city, another country. They would loot whatever they can and they would bring it back. That's normal. What David did is actual crime. David committed sin against God, sin against his fellow brother, sin against the woman with whom he slept. If you look at what the crime that David has committed, it's a multifaceted crime. It's a very intense thing, and you would expect an intense punishment on David. It almost feels to us that when Nathan came and spoke to David, and David said, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to do this. Well, actually, I'm really sorry for what I have done. Not that he didn't mean to, he was intentional in what he did. When he said sorry, God, you know what Samuel said? Nathan said, and I underlined that when I read that passage, and I thought, man, this is unbelievable. Nathan says, God had already forgiven you. You should look at that verse. It's mind-blowing. God had already forgiven you. This guy just said, I'm sorry. And Nathan says, God had already forgiven you. Basically, it means before I came itself, God had already decided to forgive you. And when you compare the crimes and the punishment, you feel like, whoa, this is unjust. This is not how it's supposed to be. And that's when, you got to look at the character of God and who God really is. He's a God who sees. In Hebrew, the name is called El Roi, the Lord who sees. The Lord who sees. Not just the external actions, but internal motivations. At the thought level, what are you really thinking? What is your real motivation? What's your real intention in doing what you're doing? When you say sorry, are you really sorry or not? He sees all of that. And based on that, he executes his justice here on earth and upon people. El Roi. But that's not just that's one angle. That story is one angle. But the woman with the alabaster story is another angle, totally different. This is a woman who would go unnoticed. If she walks on the street, we wouldn't bother to look at her. If she's somebody we know, we'd probably, based on the actions that she is, or the vocation that she is in, or the sin that she has committed, we would overlook her. Worst case scenario, we would ignore her. And if she's not around, we would forget her. This is not somebody we discuss in our normal dinner conversations. Have you ever felt like that among people? That nobody notices you, nobody cares whether you're around there or not. Nobody knows your name, you're there for a long time, but feels like no one really knows what's happening in your heart. Completely unnoticed by everybody. Just in case if somebody did notice you, you're overlooked simply because of who you are, where you come from, what your background is. The first time this word El Roi is used is in a very particular, very peculiar time. And the way God revealed, He revealed to the one person who normally, people won't even bother about her, Hagar, as she is running away from Abraham's home because Sarai was contemptuous towards her, treated her harshly, and Hagar is going out, this Egyptian woman. She's not even an Israelite, she's not a Hebrew, she doesn't belong to Abrahamic family. She's an Egyptian slave. She's going out with this little kid in her hand. God meets her. I wonder what she must be thinking as she's running away from this household where she probably was, thought this is my home. In those days, slaves are part of the family, right? And that's the only thing that they got, nothing else in the world. Unlike now, there's no transportation. You just have to walk. And where Abraham is and where our hometown may have been in Egypt must have been very far. If at all she remembers how to go there. But when God meets her and speaks to her, assures her, sends her back, all that conversation as you read it, and I'm not repeating that story for you, but as you look at that conversation, here is what caught my attention, and I kind of realized this, that it is such an encouraging thing, the story of Hagar, and the story of God's conversation with Hagar. It's such an encouraging thing for people who have always felt invisible, unnoticed, ignored, forgotten. That is when Hagar names him, I see a Lord who sees me. El Roi. Well, she is the apt person to give a title like that to God. She's the one person who always felt unnoticed. She's the one person who has been abandoned, now rejected, and feels like I got nobody. And then she realizes only Jesus. What a refreshing thought it is for us. That our God does not ignore us, never forgets us. No one goes unnoticed from his eyes. That name, implicit in that name, is God's overriding compassion. He sees the needs of all his creatures and he draws near to help. This is an Egyptian woman, remember that, in the desert, almost dying, full pregnant, just gave birth, I think. Then she would have thought, I'm dying. Nobody's going to remember who I am. Nobody's going to even find, if I die here, find my body. I would be unusual people.